This river valley that I'm in here is quite typical of a lot of river valleys that we find in Cork, lots of places in Ireland actually. We have a lot of intensively managed farm grassland, and then there's a main river channel. And a lot of people mightn't know it, but a long time ago, decades ago, this river channel was greatly altered, where it was dug out to make it deeper, to make it wider, and to make it straighter. And that was to facilitate quicker flow of water off the land, to drain land so you'd have better agricultural land, manage flooding, and so on. So the effect of that though is that our river channel is not as natural in terms of an ecosystem as it could be. But there are a lot of moves nowadays towards looking at the merits of allowing river channels to rewild, to go back more into their natural state. Because if you stop maintaining the river, as in stop dredging it, stop widening it, and don't mechanically alter it at all, give nature enough time and the river will revert back to the type that it originally was. What we do have here in rivers like this at the moment that's really nice is that right over by the water's edge, it's quite typical where you'll find the nice tree line habitats with alders, ash, willow. They're quite typical tree species. And these trees are just growing by the tree line because they're allowed to do that, I suppose. I guess what's happening is that usually, we don't have one here now, but usually there's a fence, an electric fence over close to the river, stop animals going in. And that creates a little niche area where the trees can grow. And of course trees are beneficial, farmers see the benefits of them as well. It provides nice shelter for the animals during the summer months. Shelter from the wind in the winter time, though the animals may not be out on the land then, of course. But what actually will happen if the fence line that is normally around here, for instance, was closer back, moving in 1 metre or 2 metres or 3 metres, well, what happens is you create opportunity for this wild natural tree line to be able to expand inwards. And over here, adjacent to me, there's an area within this field where that is exactly what has happened. I'm not sure why this area ground was allowed to kind of turn into a scrubby woodland habitat, but if you take a look at it now, you can see mature ash and alder trees. They're the tall ones, but there's lots of young alders that are around 10 years old, and there's blackthorn and lots of bramble, and there's deadwood actually, which most likely was probably pulled out of the river by a digger, which naturally speaking that's not a good thing, but that's what people do in these rivers, or have been doing anyway. But the idea of river rewilding is if we can be able to give over places in intensive farmland to nature, then we can create these amazing habitats, and what is a real nice tree line habitat can turn into a riverside woodland habitat. Even though we've outlined that there are benefits to having natural ecosystems within farmland, like a tree line beside the river, the reality is that they're not as valuable perhaps as they could be or as they should be. Or to put that better, more value needs to be placed on these sort of habitats, because for the farmer, the reality is, from an income and a livelihood perspective, it is making more sense for them to have intensive farmed grassland habitat rather than the wild habitat that we're speaking of. So in order for this to be able to make sense for the landowner, whether most likely they'll be a farmer, well then we need to look at what value is placed on these wild habitats. And a lot of the time value is placed on wild habitats in areas that are perhaps underproductive in terms of farming, places that are not very good for farming might be a good way to put that, so we can allow nature to thrive there. But the reality is, places that are very good for farming, those areas have wildlife living there too, have people living there too. Those sort of places need nature and need it to thrive, not just to survive. So we have to come up with systems that can accommodate the possibility of wild habitats being integrated back into the intensive farming system. And if we can do that, nature will certainly play with us in that regard, and nature will have no problem in facilitating, providing trees and wildflowers and so on, because all this sort of place needs is just give it space, just stop managing a piece of the ground intensively, and nature will come in and it'll take over. And yeah, if you want to maintain that then as a certain type of semi-wild habitat, it may need some form of management, but nothing major in terms of the resources that would be required to do that. This area that I'm in here, I'm surrounded by really young trees, nearly all of them ash, but there's hundreds of them in here, and they haven't been planted by people, they've planted themselves. And you see there's all different ages, there's small little tiny ones, there's ones that are bigger, and they're starting to come into leaf. And there's ones that are even bigger again, over here. This one is an alder, probably about 5 years old. This bit of ground that I'm in used to be intensively managed farmland. It was taken over for another purpose, wastewater treatment plant just down here below me. And this is a bit of ground that was just left aside and nothing done with. And as we've been saying, give nature its space and its chance, and in it comes and it'll do its thing. So if this is left alone, not managed, come back here in another 5 years' time, and all these trees in front of me will be up above me, and the ones that are already up above me will be over twice that size, and we won't be in a little immature young growing woodland anymore. We'll be in a forest that was never there but for it will have been given a chance. Now, I don't know what the future holds for this. Maybe it might be dug away someday, who knows, but if nature is allowed to continue to do its thing here, we're going to have a lovely forest.